I will be reading from the Investigative Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First article, State Audit Slams Wetaskic OTB Board. For at least 4 years, Henry Wetaskic and his fellow executives mismanaged the finances of Western Regional Off-Track Betting Corp., all while the board of directors was asleep at the wheel, according to a scathing new audit of the organization by New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli. The first line of the damning 28-page report sums it up. The board and corporation management did not adequately plan and monitor the corporation's financial operations. We determined the board created a lax control environment in which the corporation's management made key financial decisions with little or no oversight by the board, the report continued. Over the 4-year audit period, January 2021 through December 2024, the controller found operating revenues overall were up thanks to the casino and hotel at Batavia Downs, though revenue from horse racing and betting deteriorated at a steady pace. OTB paid more than $1 million to 14 consultants without sufficient board approval in efforts to increase revenues. 9 of them never produced written reports. Spending increases far outpaced increases in revenue. The controller noted that revenues went up 7%, while spending went up 22%. Of the spending noted by the controller, salaries increased 38% over the 4-year period, totaling $16.8 million in 2024. Between 2023 and his resignation in December 2024, Wetaskic's salary increased by more than $30,000, ending at $299,000. Payments to professional service providers increased by 23%, totaling $2.5 million in 2024. Wetaskic and management spent more than $1 million on outside lawyers without proper board approval. That spending, previously detailed by Investigative Post, included lawyers for Chief Operating Officer Scott Kiedrowski, accused in a lawsuit of sexual harassment. As a result, the controller noted OTB sent millions less each year to local governments in Western New York than it could have. By law, OTB is required to share a portion of its profits with the 17 municipalities that own the public corporation. OTB must now submit a corrective action plan to the controller's office within 90 days. In response to the audit, President and CEO Byron Brown, along with the board chairman Dennis Bassett, largely agreed with DiNapoli's findings and said they would implement corrective actions where needed. While certain findings reflect practices during prior management and in part under a prior board of directors, current leadership has taken significant steps to strengthen oversight, improve internal controls, and enhance board monitoring of financial operations, the pair wrote. In a statement, Erie County Controller Kevin Hardwick, long an OTB critic, said the audit verifies he was right to criticize the agency. The audit is particularly damning and demonstrates that the questions I've posed over the last several years have been warranted, Hardwick said. John Caney, executive director of the watchdog organization Reinvent Albany, said the audit didn't go far enough. He noted that OTB grosses more than $1 billion annually before winners and expenses are paid. He questioned why such revenues result in a pittance being distributed to local governments. The audit shows that Western OTB was a politicized dumpster fire with bloated costs and plummeting horse racing revenue, Caney said in a statement. However, the audit doesn't address the basic question our groups asked a year and a half ago. Does Western OTB, which is a public authority, serve a public purpose? In an interview, he added that Buffalo could do without OTB, whose dispersals to the city account for 0.0022% of city revenues. This money is just so marginal to Buffalo, he said. A tiny fluctuation in real estate prices is going to do more to Buffalo's finances than what these guys are doing at OTB. The report is DeNapoli's third probe of OTB in the past 5 years. The first two in 2021 found OTB spent more than $121,000 on tickets to sporting events and concerts, plus food and alcohol for board members, employees, and others without the oversight required by state rules. Wetaskic failed to reimburse OTB when he used a company car for personal matters. Wetaskic did not return a phone call Wednesday seeking comment. Board asleep at the wheel. Under New York law, the OTB Board of Directors is responsible for managing the corporation's finances. It's no small task. OTB in recent years had an annual operating budget north of $55 million. Board members are supposed to receive financial reports from management, amend and approve budgets, and okay major spending. The controller found failures all around. First, management is supposed to provide cash flow statements and reports detailing upcoming spending to board members ahead of monthly meetings. Under Wetaskic, the board received none of that information. When Wetaskic's team did provide financial reports to the board, they often arrived late, violating state law, the controller found. Second, the board worked with management on the annual operating budget at workshops as opposed to regular meetings. While board members told DeNapoli's team that they asked questions and made changes at the workshops, no minutes were taken. DeNapoli's audit said that may violate the state's open meetings law. There is a lack of transparency when the board holds discussions and make decisions out of the public's view with no record of questions, discussions, changes, or approvals that took place at workshops, the audit states. And third, the board violated its own policy when members failed to vote to approve all spending greater than $15,000. This resulted in Wetaskic's management team spending more than $1 million on lawyers and consultants because the board was not monitoring spending, the controller concluded. And fourth, when Wetaskic and his team hired those outside consultants, the board rarely received a report outlining what the firms did for OTB. The controller found that OTB, over the review period, hired 17 consultants, and the board did not receive reports or recommendations from 9 of them. Next article. I am going to save newspapers in America. The new majority owner of Lee Enterprises, the parent company of the Buffalo News, says he has the secret sauce for saving the newspaper industry. His plan for doing so involves doubling down on local coverage, right down to reporting on high school sports. It's called hyper-local in the business. It may be part of the answer to what ails daily newspapers, but only part. I am going to save newspapers in America, David Hoffman told Forbes. Hoffman believes he has found a strategy to make local papers not only survive but thrive, a seemingly simple blend of preserving cash and making a profit while doubling down on what he calls hyper-local content. The nation's largest newspaper chain, Gannett, and Palm Beach-based investment firm Alden Global Capital, which owns more than 170 titles, are both notorious for cutting staff. But Hoffman has branded layoffs a bad word. He's even adding a few newsroom jobs to bolster coverage of local tourism, sports, and business, reflecting his unabashed belief that such boosterism is important for communities' health. Meanwhile, Lee Enterprises is heading towards a legal showdown with the Associated Press. Lee said last month it wants to cancel its contract with the AP. The wire service maintains it has a legally binding agreement. I counted 19 AP stories in Saturday's print edition of the news, mostly national, international, and sports stories. I don't know how the news plans on replacing that content. It dropped the New York Times as content provider earlier this year, so there's lots of ground that needs to be covered. The AP announced last week it intends to downsize its news staff. The news organization is becoming more focused on visual journalism and developing new revenue sources, particularly through companies investing in artificial intelligence to cope with the economic collapse of many legacy news outlets. Once the lion's share of AP's revenue, big newspaper companies now account for 10% of its income. Fewer jobs, fewer people. That's the depressing reality of the Buffalo Niagara economy, as reported by the News' David Robinson. We lost 700 jobs in January alone. We are down 11,200 residents in the past 5 years. The revised job numbers show that we are still down 6,700 jobs from pre-pandemic levels, while the nation has long since recovered and has gained 4% more. If Buffalo Niagara had managed to recover at the same pace as the rest of the country, we would have 23,000 more jobs than we do now. That is a lot of paychecks and consumer spending that we are missing out on. Trump wants to boost spending on the military at the expense of the poor and middle class, according to this analysis by the New York Times. Under the president's proposed budget, spending on the military would jump by 44%. The EPA would suffer the largest cut, losing 52% of its budget. Elsewhere in Trump land, the Department of Homeland Security is outsourcing more immigration enforcement to local agencies and politically connected contractors. And our next article, Tough Economic Times for Young Adults. A college degree is no longer a ticket to a good job. Plus, vacant office buildings and politicians and the growth of nonprofit news outlets, including Investigative Post. Article by Jim Heaney. I've long thought it's tough growing up as a kid these days. What with social media and the world around them generally going to hell, it's not great being a young adult looking for work either. Reports the New York Times in this gift link. Job openings have been trending down and are below pre-pandemic levels, even as layoffs have remained low. A result has been a broad hiring stasis among employers that has hurt all new entrants to the labor market, a group that includes young workers with college degrees and those without them. There's just a general slowdown in hiring and less churn, said Adam Ozimek, the chief economist at the Economic Innovation Group, a nonpartisan think tank. And so those who need their first jobs are probably disproportionately affected. A possible contributing factor is that the labor market's cool down in the past few years has been concentrated in industries that generally attract young graduates, including technology, media, accounting, and consulting. More people are also graduating with college degrees, heightening the competition for entry-level white-collar jobs. Add to this the falling value of some graduate degrees, according to the Washington Post. Graduate degrees in medicine, law, and pharmacy generally have the highest return on investment. By contrast, degrees in popular fields such as social work, psychology, and curriculum and instruction may actually have a 0 to negative return after factoring in the full cost. This dynamic has all sorts of consequences for young adults. For example, coupled with rising prices and college debt, it's becoming increasingly more difficult for them to buy a house. Nevertheless, Uncle Sam spends a lot more on retirees than other age groups. Americans age 65 and older, generally part of the baby boom generation or silent generation, received an estimated $2.7 trillion in federal outlays last year, 6 times as much as the $449 billion for Americans under 26 years old. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Investigative Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next article. Major tax hike in Buffalo appears inevitable. Article by Jeff Kelly. Buffalo Mayor Sean Ryan's administration started dropping bombs in the last couple weeks. At a February 19th press conference, the mayor let slip he would propose a 25% hike in the city's property tax levy when he submits his first budget proposal, which is due April 15th. Then Ryan announced he was lobbying state lawmakers to allow the city to issue deficit bonds through the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority, aka the Control Board, to help cover the city's operating costs over the next couple of years without the Control Board reverting to strict oversight or hard status. He also wants to boost the Control Board's debt limit from $175 million to $500 million. Both measures require changes in the 2003 state law that created the Control Board. The reason for the proposed tax hike and borrowing: a structural budget imbalance. That is the difference between the city's recurring revenues and predictable costs that Ryan's finance department recently has pegged at a minimum of $50 million, and in the worst scenario as high as $109 million. Those are big figures to lob into the months-long conversation about city finances that's been littered with competing and sometimes contradictory numbers. Outside of the mayor's office, virtually nobody in City Hall is on board with the idea of raising the city's tax by 25%. No one has yet advanced proposals to cut city expenditures either. Fillmore District Councilman Mitch Nowakowski, chair of the council's finance committee, said each percentage point equates to about $2 million. He said it's unrealistic to imagine cutting $50 million or even $25 million in expenditures for the fiscal year that begins July 1st. In a word, it would be catastrophic, he said. The way our budget is structured right now is already bare bones with minimal service. To maintain those services, let alone improve them, Nowakowski said the city has to get out of a structural deficit that's been more than a decade in the making. That will require turning the knobs on the only recurring revenue source that the city controls: property taxes. First, the numbers. To explain the need for the tax increase, the Ryan administration last week released a chart describing the deleterious impacts of former Mayor Byron Brown's stubborn insistence on not raising taxes over most of his 19 years in office. By failing to raise the property tax levy to keep pace with the inflation, basically 2% each year, the city of Buffalo left a cumulative $602 million on the table, according to the Ryan administration's calculations. The property tax levy was $146.3 million in 2006-2007, the first year Brown wrote a city budget. In inflation-adjusted dollars, that would be $235.2 million today. The actual tax levy in the current budget year, which ends June 30th, is set at $184.5 million. A 25% increase on that number in the coming year would bring the city closer to, but still shy of, aligning its tax revenue with the rate of inflation. Brown, during his long tenure as mayor, was more likely to lower the levy than increase it, as Investigative Post has reported previously. Meanwhile, costs continued to climb at a rate far greater than inflation, thanks largely to the rising cost of health insurance and pension benefits for city employees. To make up the mounting difference, Brown spent down more than $100 million in savings that the city built up between 2003 and 2012, when the Control Board was still in hard oversight mode. Those reserves ran out in 2019, and it seemed like Buffalo's day of fiscal reckoning had arrived. In June 2020, as the budget year was coming to a close, the city had to borrow $25 million to cover its costs. The Brown administration blamed COVID shutdowns for the shortfall, but the real culprit was years of budgets that inflated revenue projections, understated expenses, and made up the difference with one-shot revenues. Then, in 2021, the federal government slowed the city's march toward insolvency with $331 million in pandemic relief money. The city used nearly $225 million plus many millions more accrued in interest on that pot of money to cover budget gaps. But now that money is gone too. Last year, acting Mayor Chris Scanlon's administration was compelled to balance the books with a $6.8 million from the city's rainy day fund by law intended to be used only in the event of catastrophes. In the current budget year, which ends June 30th, the city will have spent $703 million, according to the most recent cash flow projections by the city controller. Revenues are expected to finish at $678 million. That figure does not include the promise of $40 million in additional state aid the Ryan administration wrested from the governor last month, $30 million to help balance the books on the current budget, $10 million towards next year's spending plan. It does include $26.5 million from the sale of 4 city parking ramps to a newly created parking authority, another one-shot source of income. Without the parking ramp sale and the extra state aid, there is a $50 million difference between revenues and expenditures, and that's the gap a 25% tax hike aims to fill. Our next article, Buffalo corrects course on opioid addiction spending. Article by Adam Smith Perez. The city of Buffalo is starting to course correct its spending of millions of opioid fighting dollars. Previously, the city squandered thousands of dollars earmarked to combat opioid addiction on lawnmowers for block clubs, speakers for a fireboat, and new lights and sirens for a police vehicle. Hundreds of thousands more were spent on law enforcement equipment unrelated to addiction. The city also gave $500,000 to Save the Michaels to renovate and staff a facility for women leaving inpatient treatment, but it never opened. For the first time in 2 years, the city now says it will use the money to provide counseling and improve care for addicts. Mayor Sean Ryan's administration will commit nearly $200,000, a small percentage of the remaining $4 million in opioid fighting money, to Catholic Health and Evergreen Health Services, with most of that money funding a counseling program. Opioid settlement funds are a once-in-a-lifetime pool of money of millions of dollars meant to help communities recover from opioid addiction. Most of the funds in New York are administered by the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. Here's a breakdown of where the dollars will go. $132,127 will fund a counseling program at the Sisters of Charity Hospital on Main Street. Evergreen Health will partner with Catholic Health to hire one or more recovery coaches, an individual who has been through addiction treatment and recovery themselves, to help direct clients to counseling and treatment. $55,705 will go to upgrading equipment and electronic health record systems at Catholic Health's Methadone Clinic on Holden Street in the East Side. I'll call this Catholic initiative kind of a gold standard idea of really smart way to use the money, putting it in the hands of folks that are on the front line, said Deputy Mayor Ben Swinkamp, who oversees the city's finance department. We'll be looking for more opportunities to fund initiatives like this. Evergreen Health, a prominent local healthcare provider which has had a robust harm reduction program since the 1980s, will deploy a recovery team to the Sisters of Charity's emergency department on days that opioid-related visits are highest. To start, the program will operate twice a week. A little less than a third of funds will pay for upgrades at the Methadone Clinic on Holden Street. Swinkamp and Catholic health providers say that the tech overhaul and related improvements will result in better care. For one, the clinic will replace outdated methadone dispensing equipment, and a system upgrade will sync its health record system with the one used by Catholic Health hospitals and other area hospitals. Those folks might have opioid use disorders, but could also have diabetes, could have a heart condition, Swinkamp said. So we're going to pay for them to build essentially an interface that will allow these two programs to talk to each other in a seamless fashion. Since the 1970s, Catholic Health has offered alternatives to opioids like Suboxone and methadone, coupled with counseling to patients with opioid use disorder. It is the largest methadone provider in the state outside of New York City and operates 3 treatment facilities in the Buffalo area. The program, helmed by Catholic Health's addiction specialist, Dr. Paul Updike, has been vetted and approved by the Erie County Health Department and its commissioner, Dr. Gail Bernstein. And our final article, upcoming talk on reforming City Hall and state government. John Caney is always a good interview. The co-founder and executive director of reInvent Albany has a firm grasp of government and a sharp tongue in expressing his thoughts. That's why his upcoming live interview with Investigative Post editor Jim Heaney promises to be insightful and probably a bit provocative. The Q&A is set for Thursday, April 30th at 7 p.m. at Big Ditch Brewing, 55 East Huron Street in downtown Buffalo. Admission is $10, and this includes a free ticket for a beer. Tickets can be ordered here. Keeney has written and successfully lobbied for the passage of state and New York City laws related to government transparency and accountability, including the first open data law in the world in 2012. He's also one of the first called by the press when there is a government corruption scandal. reInvent Albany's recent advocacy includes putting teeth in the state's Freedom of Information law, helping win the creation of the state's public campaign matching system, greater funding and transparency for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and taking on corporate subsidy boondoggles, including the infamous Buffalo Billion. His April 30th interview will focus on Buffalo City Hall as a citizen panel commissioned by the Common Council considers changes to the city charter, as well as the self-serving ways of state government and the special interests that unduly influence it. And you have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Investigative Post. We read from the Investigative Post on Thursdays at 8:30 a.m. Your reader has been Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.
Good morning. Welcome to another broadcast day on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, a private not-for-profit organization. Radio Reading volunteers broadcast daily readings of newspapers, magazines, and books to area blind or print handicapped persons who will provide their reading radios. We broadcast 24/7 every day of the year throughout Western York and Southern Ontario's Niagara Peninsula. As always, please feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, or any questions you may have. And please stay with us. Ring the Bell phone news is coming up next.
The following program is intended